Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time we're headed into a truly extreme environment, Death Valley.
Yeah, it's known for that scorching heat, those incredible landscapes.
But it's also home to a fascinating story of survival, and that's what we're going to dive into today, right?
Absolutely, we're talking about the pupfish.
The pupfish. And we'll be using this awesome YouTube video by a birding naturalist as our guide.
A great video. Really showcases how life can not only survive, but thrive in some pretty crazy conditions.
Yeah, it really makes you think, like, how did these fish end up in such a harsh place to begin with?
Well, you got to rewind thousands of years. Picture Death Valley completely different.
Okay, what do you mean?
It wasn't always this arid landscape. It used to be submerged under this huge lake, Lake Manly.
Wow, a whole lake.
Abundant water, all kinds of fish, a totally different ecosystem.
So what happened? How did it change so much?
Well, over time, the climate shifted, and Lake Manly slowly dried up.
Oh, I see.
And that left behind these, scattered pools of water.
Isolated pocket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the fish that were used to living in that big lake, they were suddenly confined to these shrinking spaces.
Must have been quite a shock.
It was adapt or perish, basically.
So that's where our pupfish come in.
Precisely. They're a type of killifish known to be pretty tough, but the Death Valley pupfish, they're something else.
In a league of their own.
For sure. And each of those isolated pools, they had their own unique challenges.
So the fish had to adapt differently in each one.
You got it. Which is why we see this incredible diversity in pupfish species, each perfectly tuned to its specific little environment.
I'm really curious about those adaptations. What makes them so different from your average fish?
Some of their adaptations are pretty mind-blowing, like some of these pupfish can live in water 4 times saltier than the ocean.
Whoa, no way. How's that even possible?
Well, they've evolved these special cells in their gills that actually pump out excess salt.
Wow, like a built-in desalination system.
Pretty much. And it allows them to keep their internal environment stable, even in these crazy saline pools.
That's wild. But what about the heat? Death Valley gets ridiculously hot.
Yeah, you're right. Most fish are cold-blooded. Their body temperature just goes with the flow of the water around them.
Makes sense.
But pupfish, they've developed this incredible ability to regulate their internal temperature, for some degree at least.
Really?
Yeah, so they can actually remain active even when the water gets hot enough to kill most other fish.
Wow. So we've got these super fish. They can handle the salt, they can handle the heat, but how did they even get these powers, so to speak?
Well, that's where evolution comes in, specifically what we call allopatric speciation.
Okay, break that down for me.
Basically, when populations get geographically separated, like, when that lake dried up and left those isolated pools,
Right.
those separated groups, they start to evolve independently.
Because they can't really mix anymore.
Exactly. So any beneficial mutations that pop up in one pool, they're more likely to spread within that population.
And become the norm.
Exactly. And because each pool has its own unique environmental pressures, different traits get selected for. Over time, you start to see these distinct species emerge.
Because like each pool is its own little evolutionary experiment.
That's a great way to put it. And the result is this incredible diversity of pupfish, each with its own unique set of adaptations.
So it's not just one kind of superfish, it's like a whole league of them.
That's it. Some specialize in hot springs, others prefer cooler, deeper pools. Some are herbivores, some are more carnivorous. It's really fascinating.
This is reminding me, I read somewhere that these pupfish aren't just tough survivors, they can actually be quite beautiful, right?
Oh, absolutely. You should see them in their natural habitat. It's striking.
Paint us a picture. What's it like?
Imagine these crystal clear pools tucked away in this seemingly barren landscape.
Like a hidden oasis.
Exactly. And then you see these flashes of color darting around in the water.
Sounds almost magical.
It really is. And the males, especially during breeding season, many species, the males will turn these brilliant shades of blue.
Oh, wow. Why is that?
It's all about attraction. Got to stand out to find a mate, right?
Makes sense. But as amazing as these fish are, I know they're also facing some serious challenges to their survival.
Yeah, sadly, that's true. Their whole existence is tied to these fragile desert oases. If those environments get disrupted, it can be devastating for them.
And I'm guessing there are a lot of potential threats, right?
Yeah, there are. One of the big ones is invasive species. Imagine a non-native fish gets introduced to one of these pools.
Uh-oh.
It could outcompete the pupfish for food or even prey on them directly.
It's like throwing a wrench in the whole system.
Exactly. Maintaining that delicate balance is really crucial. And then there's the issue of groundwater pumping. Human activities can change the flow of water that feeds these springs.
Potentially drying up the pupfish's habitat.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even in seemingly remote places, our actions can have a big impact.
And I can't imagine climate change is helping the situation either.
No, it's a major concern. Death Valley is already so extreme, and if temperatures keep rising, it could push these fish beyond their limits. It's a real race against time to understand the threats and do what we can to protect them.
Which brings me to my next question. What is being done to conserve these unique species? I know there are people actively working to help them, right?
Oh, absolutely. Research and monitoring are crucial. Got to track the population, see what the dangers are.
So it's about gathering data,
Yeah, but it's not just about data. We need active intervention, too.
like hands-on action.
Yes, habitat restoration and management are key.
What does that involve? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. One approach is actually removing invasive species. Physically trapping and removing fish that don't belong there.
Wow, so very direct approach.
It takes a lot of planning and careful work. You don't want to disrupt the ecosystem further.
Yeah.
Then there's protecting the water sources themselves, preventing contamination, maybe fencing off areas around springs to keep livestock out.
So thinking about the whole picture, the entire area that supports these fish.
Exactly. And often it takes a team effort. Scientists, land managers, local communities, all working together.
A collaborative effort. And you mentioned creating artificial refuges earlier. What are those exactly?
Think of them as backup habitats, safe havens for the pupfish, just in case their natural homes are lost or become uninhabitable.
Like a safety net.
Exactly. They could be man-made ponds, modified springs, different things like that.
But I imagine it must be hard to recreate those exact conditions they need.
It can be, for sure.
Hmm.
You have to consider things like water chemistry, temperature fluctuations, the right food sources.
It's like recreating a whole little ecosystem in a controlled setting.
Pretty much. And you need constant monitoring and adjustments to make sure it's working for them.
So are these efforts actually making a difference? Are we seeing positive results?
There have been some great success stories, like the Devil's Hole pupfish, once considered the world's rarest fish.
I've heard of that one.
With intensive conservation efforts, they've actually seen a significant population increase.
That's amazing. That gives me hope. But are there cases where things aren't going so well?
Unfortunately, yes. Some pupfish species are still declining despite our best efforts. It's a tough battle. Invasive species are hard to manage. Climate change keeps throwing curveballs.
It highlights how fragile these ecosystems really are.
Yeah, conservation is an ongoing process, always adapting to new challenges.
So even with all the hard work, the future of these pupfish is still uncertain.
That's the reality. It all comes down to our commitment to understanding them, mitigating the threats, being flexible and innovative.
It's a heavy responsibility.
It is, but it's important to remember the pupfish's story, it's not just about them, it reflects the bigger picture of our planet's health.
It's a reminder that we need to be better stewards of the natural world.
Exactly. Their story is a call to action. We need to recognize that we're all connected and our choices have consequences.
And that even seemingly small creatures, like the pupfish, can teach us valuable lessons.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to continue that conversation in the next part of our deep dive.
Definitely, there's a lot more to uncover and explore. It really is. It's a story of resilience, but also kind of a cautionary tale. The pupfish's future is tied to our actions.
That's a powerful thought. So let's dig deeper into those conservation efforts. You mentioned habitat restoration before. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, one approach is to actually physically remove invasive species,
Okay.
like, trapping and removing fish that don't belong there, ones that are competing with the pupfish or preying on them.
So it's very hands-on, boots-on-the-ground stuff.
Yeah, it's very precise work. Got to be careful not to disrupt the ecosystem even more in the process. And then there's protecting the water sources themselves, those springs.
Right, making sure they stay clean and healthy.
Exactly, preventing any kind of contamination. Sometimes that means fencing off areas to keep livestock away.
I see. So it's about thinking big picture, not just focusing on the fish themselves, but the whole environment that supports them.
That's it. You got it.
Yeah.
It often takes a lot of collaboration, too. Scientists, land managers, people who live in the area, all working together.
It takes a village, as they say.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned creating these artificial refuges.
Right. Those are crucial.
Can you explain a bit more about what those are and how they work?
Sure. Think of them as backup habitats, safe places for the pupfish, just in case their natural homes are lost or become too dangerous.
Like a plan B for survival.
Exactly. And they can take different forms. Sometimes they're man-made ponds, sometimes modified springs, things like that.
It must be tough, though, to recreate those exact conditions they need to thrive.
Oh, for sure. It's a challenge.
Hmm.
We had to think about water chemistry, how the temperature fluctuates, making sure they have the right food sources. It's complicated.
It's like trying to build a whole mini ecosystem from scratch.
Yeah, and it requires constant monitoring, adjustments,
Hmm.
making sure it's really working for them.
It sounds like a really delicate process. So, all in all, are these efforts actually making a difference? Are we seeing some wins?
There have been some incredible success stories, for sure. Like the devil's hole pupfish, you've probably heard of it.
Yeah, the name rings a bell.
Well, it was once considered the rarest fish in the whole world.
Wow.
But thanks to these really intense conservation efforts, restoring habitat, creating a replica refuge, their population has actually rebounded quite a bit.
That's so great to hear. That really does give me hope. But I'm guessing it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Are there cases where things aren't looking as positive?
Unfortunately, yes. Some pupfish species are still struggling. Their numbers are going down despite our best efforts. It's a tough situation.
What are the biggest obstacles in those cases?
Well, some threats are just really hard to manage, like invasive species. And then you have things like climate change. It's unpredictable. It throws these curveballs that are hard to plan for.
It really shows how delicate this whole balance is.
For sure. Conservation isn't a one and done thing. It's a constant process, always adapting to new challenges.
So, even with all this dedication and hard work, the future of some of these pupfish is still hanging in the balance.
Yeah, it's a precarious situation.
Yeah.
Their survival ultimately depends on our continued commitment, you know, understanding their needs, reducing those threats as much as we can, and just being innovative, finding new ways to protect them as things change.
It's a big responsibility, no doubt.
It is. But, it's important to see this bigger picture. The pupfish's story, it's not just about these little fish in the desert. It's a reflection of the health of our entire planet.
Right, it shows how interconnected everything really is. What happens in one seemingly isolated place can have ripple effects far beyond.
Exactly. Their story is a call to action for all of us. It's about recognizing that we're all connected and the choices we make, they matter. They have consequences.
And that even seemingly insignificant creatures like the pupfish, they can teach us some pretty profound lessons.
Yes.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, but we'll have to continue this conversation in the last part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
So we've talked about their incredible adaptations, the threats they're facing, and the amazing work being done to protect them. As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what's the one thing that really sticks with you? What makes this story so important?
For me, it really highlights just how interconnected everything is. We've got these tiny fish living in this remote desert, and yet their fate is tied to our actions, to what we do as a society.
It's like that butterfly effect, right? Something that seems small and isolated can actually have huge consequences elsewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The pupfish are like a tiny mirror reflecting these bigger environmental issues we're all facing. There's a wake-up call. Our actions have consequences for ourselves and for the whole planet.
Yeah, it's a message that really hits home, especially now with climate change and biodiversity loss being such urgent concerns. But there's also a sense of hope in their story, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. The fact that they've managed to hang on for thousands of years, adapting to these crazy conditions, it's proof that life is incredibly resilient. It shows that even when things look bleak, there's always hope.
Like, hey, if these little fish can figure it out in Death Valley, maybe we can too.
Exactly. They're an inspiration. They show us that adaptation is possible, that we can find creative solutions, and that even the smallest creatures can make a huge difference.
So, thinking big picture now, what can we learn from the pupfish? What lessons can we take away from their story and apply to our own lives?
Well, I think they teach us the importance of being adaptable. The world is constantly changing, so our ability to adapt, to be flexible, to come up with new solutions, that's more important than ever.
It's about being willing to change, to see things from different angles, to try new approaches.
Exactly. And it's also about understanding that we're all connected. What affects one species, even a tiny fish in the desert, it affects us all eventually. We're not separate from nature. We're part of this intricate web of life.
So, how do we actually put that into practice? How can we apply those lessons in our daily lives?
It starts with being aware, learning about the issues facing our planet, understanding how these ecosystems work,